this seems to me very big and very disruptive in a way, because thinking in the way social constructionism thinks is how to say, it's not the old stable way to see things, you know. In the old stable ways, we can say, taking your example, okay, this is a glass, this is an object, this is this, and this is this forever and for everyone.
Yeah.
And in your beautiful books, we are lucky to have this book in Italian, social construction and therapeutic practice, translated by Diego Romaioli, who is a
very good friend of mine and lovely man.
It's a very lovely guy. I can say that, and it's interesting because in a way, when I was reading this book, I was saying something like, "Oh, wow, this is so big, so mind-blowing in a way, you know." In another way, I can see the possibilities that you give to yourself as a therapist and to your clients. But my question is, you talk a little about influences of social constructionism on psychotherapy. Do you have any suggestion about, in the social constructionism perspective, about what do you need to help the people to change, to solve their problem, to have benefit from therapy? How change the practical work of the psychotherapist?
Yeah. The way I've begun to think about this early on, initially when that set of ideas was developing, what it did was to form a kind of critique of all the therapies that existed till then, in the sense of, let's say, Freudian therapy, Rogerian, and there were numerous other therapies who were all competing to find out which one was the right one. Cognitive behavior, another one. As if there was like treatments for some kind of disease. And each therapy depended on assumptions. Like psychoanalysis depended on an idea of repression and unconscious. Cognitive behavioral depended on the notion of cognitive construals or ideas of a cognitive system. Rogerian depended on unconditional positive regard. Each one had what you might say a foundational assumption. What constructionism did is to say, look, there are no foundations. These are just ideas.
Yeah.
And to fight about which one is the right one, that's not right. There isn't any right one. They're all ideas, and each of them has values and certain people for whom they might be useful, but they're not useful universally, and they carry values that not everyone would agree to.
Yeah.
To give you an example, a lot of feminist critique, which came out of constructionist ideas, feminist critique of psychoanalysis, because it said if you're a woman and you go to a psychoanalyst, you're in a power relationship where the analyst knows everything, you know nothing.
Yeah.
And eventually that analyst will help you to discover what he already knows.
Yeah.
So as a feminist critique, it was saying, look, why do we have to believe that? Because we don't like the power relationship. And there are other critiques of Carl Rogers and his therapy, which was Christianity in another form. It was saying if you love everything will grow and be proper. So Carl Rogers was like Christ. I love you unconditionally. It's carrying values of a particular kind. Now, what that did was to say, look, you do not have to subscribe to any of those therapies. They are all possibilities. We don't have to fight about which was the best, because there is no best. In a changing world, they each have certain things they can do and don't do. Now, that was the beginning, because it just gave you freedom. It was like, wow, so I don't have to have any of those therapies necessarily. So it was like liberation from foundationalism. Now that's the first step. The second step, which is very related to what you do, is to say, all right, if those are social constructions, what if we looked at therapy as a kind of a social process of social construction? In other words, it's taking that set of ideas and say, why don't we use them in the therapeutic process? The obvious case from this, narrative therapy. It was a child of social constructionist ideas. Look, what we're doing is telling a story about our lives. And some stories are really hurtful for us, others help us. So therapy becomes then a matter of trying to find a different story. You know, it's like restoring the problem a person has is the way they're telling about the problem.
Yeah.
Problem is the problem. That is the way you tell yourself, I'm a failure, I can't do this, I can't do that, no one loves me, I'm unlovable, I have weird ideas. That narrative is already your problem. So then therapy becomes a whole re-narration. Now, brief therapy inherits that same set of assumptions. De Shazer is basically a constructionist. It says, look, let's not talk about the problem so much, but we can talk about the problem infinitely for years. And because we talk about the problem only becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. The more you talk about it, the more real it becomes. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about where do you want to, I'm rephrasing, where do you want to go? What would it be like if you woke up 5 years from now? It's like, it's a different way of talking about yourself and the world.
Yeah.
So if you don't try to solve the problem, if that's a construction, but you talk about where you want to go and how you can get there, what strengths you have,
Yeah.
and what it would be like, you open up a whole different way of treatment, which of course you know better than me, says, look, people can come in and it doesn't take that long. It doesn't take 5 years of psychoanalysis. It takes 3 months of talking about in a different way. So those are just two examples, and there are a lot of others. Reflecting teams came out of that same idea. Let's not have one way of looking at it. Let's multiply the ways of seeing things of different voices. This is Tom Anderson. Harlene Anderson's postmodern therapy, where you simply listen and try to bring the person out so that slowly the story changes. Not so much, it's very interesting because, Kelly's theory, which is very sort of constructionist, not quite constructionist. It's still a cognitive therapy.
Yeah.
So But but what I'm telling you about brief therapy, narrative therapy, that's different. They're just saying, look, change the conversation.
Yeah.
And you change the world for the person. Change the way we're talking. What we're talking about, change the content, change the way we're relating, and you can bring about change.